Well, welcome to the second episode of the Canada Talks Electric Cars webinar, brought to you by the Electric Vehicle Society. This webinar series takes place on the first Tuesday of each month and examines a broad range of EV-related topics from a Canadian perspective. My name is Tim Burrows, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. Electric Vehicle Society is a national Canadian organization whose goal is to leverage the expertise of electric vehicle owners and enthusiasts to help Canadians transition to electric transportation through education and advocacy. If you're interested in learning more about EVs, we invite you to join us at one of our free chapter meetings, now held every month via video conference. Thanks to today's episode sponsor, Kenneth Bokor of YouTube's EV Revolution Show, a channel focused on the global market of electrified automotive transportation. The EV Revolution Show provides informative content, including news style reporting, electric vehicle reviews, and coverage of many EV-focused events. Check out Ken's YouTube channel and subscribe today. Today's webinar is being recorded for later viewing on the EV Society's newly minted YouTube channel. The entire webinar will run for no longer than 60 minutes. All guests have joined today's webinar with the microphones muted. We invite you to ask our guest speaker questions at any time using the webinar's Q&A function. One of our webinar team members, Jason Arno, will read out your questions immediately following the presentation. Be sure to use the Q&A feature if you wish our panel to see your questions. The chat function will not be seen by the panel or used to accept any questions. In addition to posting questions in Q&A, you may upvote any other questions you wish to hear answered. Do this by clicking the thumbs up icon in the same way you would like something on social media. This moves the question higher on the list and will help Jason prioritize the questions to be asked. So today's webinar is entitled Roaming Canada's EV Charging Landscape. And we are indeed fortunate to have with us Suzanne Goldberg, Director of Public Policy for ChargePoint in Canada. Suzanne is an energy, climate, and electric vehicle policy professional with over 10 years of experience. She is currently the Director of Public Policy for ChargePoint in Canada, the world's leading electric vehicle charging network. In this role, she covers federal, provincial, and municipal affairs, managing engagement on electric vehicle policy across Canada. Prior to ChargePoint, Suzanne was Director of Research and Outreach for START, the Sustainable Transportation Action Research Team at Simon Fraser University, and a founding partner of the consulting firm Navius Research. Suzanne, welcome to EV Society and the Canada Talks July webcast. It's now my great pleasure to turn the microphone and the screen over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Tim, and I will try and successfully execute a screen share. Okay. Do we have success there? Okay, perfect. Well, just want to thank the EV Society and the whole team that's coordinating the webinar series for inviting me to speak and for facilitating today. I'm really excited to talk with all of you, in particular about EV driver roaming, and and having a presentation about how we our partnerships with other networks and why we engage in EV driver roaming. But in the discussion, I'm really keen to chat with all of you EV drivers and, really get a sense of your experience, if at all, with roaming here in Canada. So my presentation flow is going to be as follows. I'm going to give a brief introduction of ChargePoint for those of you who might not be familiar. Open with a bit of an outlook on EV sales, just in light of current conditions and what we're experiencing in our economy, and then I transition into a conversation about roaming. So as Tim mentioned, ChargePoint is a global leader in EV charging solutions for the wide range of electric mobility options that help move goods and people across our cities, provinces, states, and countries. And for more than a decade, we've been building the new fueling future. From residential to retail, workplace, and fleets, ChargePoint's mission is to ensure that all vehicles, kilometers traveled, be it for business or passenger use, are traveled with electric kilometers. On a global scale, we have over 113,000 charging points globally, plus another 100,000 or over 100,000 roaming spots. And because of the wide scope of our network and coverage, everyone is, there's a person plugging into the ChargePoint network every 2 seconds. So what this means is by the time this presentation is over and the session is over in the next hour, 475 people would have plugged in on the ChargePoint network at home, and close to 1,800 people would have plugged into a commercial station on the ChargePoint network. In Canada, our footprint is coast to coast, so from St. John's, Newfoundland to Prince George, BC, and we offer charging solutions for passenger vehicles and commercial vehicles in Canada, as well as across all of North America. So I'd like to open with this slide, and you know, I think I'm speaking, looking at the poll to a group of individuals who you know, see this as fact, and I'm talking to the converted here, but you know, I think it's important to note that, you know, mobility has been a fundamental component of our economies and our functioning as society, you know, for centuries. But what does change is how we access mobility, the modes we choose, and the technologies we use within our mobility community. And you know, electric mobility is one of those fundamental transitional components that is going to be part of this major shift in our transportation sector over the next 2 decades. Now, I know we've all observed some significant impacts with COVID, and most notably being a significant decrease in travel of all kinds, and specifically road travel, not just for EVs, but for, you know, all passenger vehicles alike, as people are staying at home and working at home. But even with this in mind, you know, there are a couple of interesting takeaways from the Bloomberg New Energy Finance, their latest EV outlook. And, you know, I think a lot of people are wondering what this current impact will have on the trajectory for EV sales. And despite, you know, Bloomberg projecting, you know, short-term impact in sales of all vehicles, and including EVs, over the next 5 years, they do remain, as we do, optimistic that the long-term projections for EV sales will continue to grow and grow significantly. And this market transformation, this transition, will continue to persist in the long term. And another interesting piece noted in the outlook, if you haven't read it already, is, you know, a point around while passenger vehicle EV sales might decrease you know, in the short term, there's less of a decline on the fleet side, just as a result of increased good movement, as we're all purchasing goods from home rather than going to retail locations. So, you know, the outlook in the long term remains strong. And this projection and other projections that are looking at the short-term impact of COVID and the long-term projection for EV sales, really, there's 3 key factors that are supporting these trajectories for long-term EV sales growth in the future. The first is government policies. And I found this really interesting when reading the EV outlook of Bloomberg. What they noted in the short term is that the regions that had more aggressive or comprehensive policy packages related to EVs would be the ones that had, you know, sustained momentum in the short term. And so I think it's important within the Canadian context that, we have an opportunity now to kind of double down on our policies and look at what we can do both at a provincial and a federal scale to support electric mobility. The second piece is automaker investments and bringing new makes and models to the market, specifically the types of vehicles that Canadians drive the most, SUVs and pickup trucks. And I'm sure you're all very well versed in the announcements of mostly all major manufacturers. And, while some models have been delayed by a year, the commitments from all the auto manufacturers remain. So this is another factor that is supporting this long-term outlook for significant transition to EVs. And then the last piece is consumers and fleets switching to electric. And I think a critical component of this is related to consumer awareness and education, and a large part of what you do as an EV society is supporting consumers and businesses in terms of understanding the benefits of driving electric. And so we're seeing that consumer sentiment in Canada remains quite strong, with numerous surveys over the last 4 or 5 years showing majority of Canadians being interested in purchasing electric vehicles. So, I refer to kind of the long-term prospects and, this short-term potential slowdown in all vehicle sales. But I want to point out that there are elements that we can focus on in Canada from a policy and then consumer perspective to maintain the momentum that we have benefited from in Canada with, the growth in EV sales that we've seen since 2012. I believe in March of 2020, EV sales were just over 5%. So we've gained a lot of momentum in Canada. And in the short term, when we look at how the government is supporting stimulus and recovery, I think there's an important opportunity, to remind our policymakers of the importance of policy in supporting EVs. And so it's a broad range of policy measures that can help us maintain this momentum. And that's everything from rebates for vehicles, both new and as well as used, bringing a broader segment of consumers into the fold, looking at how utilities can support EV adoption by introducing rates that create opportunities and incentives for individuals to charge at certain times of the day, or rates that help reduce investment barriers to DC fast charging. So for those of you who are familiar with demand charge, looking at demand charge reform and really helping to support a business case to build out Canada's fast charging network. And then there are policies around making it easier and cheaper to retrofit condos and apartments for EV charging. As we've observed from current circumstances, home is a really important place to charge. So making sure that we have home charging access in all types of dwellings is important. So, I make this point and list these policies off just to encourage everyone to, remind their MPs and, their policymakers that, now is an important time to double down on our policies and to, acknowledge that there is an positive economic impact as we build out green infrastructure. The next piece in terms of supporting EV sales is related to, this really fundamental component of what the driver needs and maintaining their ability to have seamless access to charging infrastructure. And I think, as probably most of you are aware, this is a really fundamental part of ensuring that electric mobility and the market for electric mobility is sustained in the long term. Is really a focus on the driver, and that driver could be a fleet or it could be a passenger vehicle. But in my mind, how we support that is threefold. It's making it easier for EV drivers to find stations, to see what the price is. So the technology available today, while the app driver app is at the center. There are multiple ways and technologies that drivers can use to interact with their charging experience. But the Apple Watch, you can ask your your Alexa assistant, virtual assistant, to start your charge. So that's one element of improving the driver experience. The other is making it easy for drivers to pay. So multiple payment options, including making it easier for drivers to have access to charging stations across multiple networks. And that's what I'll focus on in the remainder of my presentation. And the last piece here is just really about ensuring that charging infrastructure is available in all the locations where EV drivers need them. And again, this is something I know it's quite fundamental to your everyday, but I think there's a role here in terms of continued partnerships with different types of entities to provide charging in the wide range of locations where EV drivers go, both within their daily commuting and as well as long distance. So I'll just point out here, we have some strong partnerships with the City of Vancouver, for example, who is deploying DC fast charging within a 10-minute drive of anywhere in BC, looking at other places that like conventional gas station and convenience stores and partnerships with grocery stores. So the number of station owners and the variety of station owners are growing rapidly. So this all comes together to provide that seamless experience and access. I won't spend too much time on this slide, but I just wanted to show you a snapshot of our EV driver app, just to highlight what type of visibility and access you can get and how that supports a seamless driver experience. In addition to what you see here, the ability to, in a workplace, for example, to put yourself on a wait list, all adds to, the increased reliability that you have availability of charging and gives you more confidence. So showing this to just make that point. So switching to the topic at hand, I think EV driver roaming is going to be even more important as we move closer to an electric mobility future. And I think roaming offers a service that will help us expand access to electric vehicle charging wherever EV drivers go. And I think this is really important for the next wave of EV drivers who might be hesitant or not understand the fueling experience. It's a kind of paradigm shift when switching, as you all know, from gasoline to electric. So really focusing on ways that we can make it more seamless and easy is a really important mission for us at ChargePoint and for a number of our roaming partners. So, in a nutshell, the goal of roaming is to make it seamless and easy for drivers to get behind a wheel, no matter where they're going and what network they're on. And, I think as EV drivers, especially, I saw a number of individuals who have owned an EV for 7 to 9 years. So I'm sure you had a keychain full of different fobs for EV charging networks. And now, I guess the EV drivers of the 1 to 3 years had multiple networks in maybe a folder on their app. And what EV roaming enables you to do is have seamless access to multiple networks using one app. So roaming really represents one of the more convenient and seamless ways for drivers to use charging stations on multiple networks. And roaming is similar to roaming or traveling roaming with your mobile phone. And this allows a driver to registered on their existing network to locate a charge at any place that's operated by one of the roaming partners. And they can do so without having to worry about creating a new account, downloading another app, or most importantly, paying additional fees. So unlike the roaming with your bank card or printing your movie tickets out at home, there is no convenience fee. This is a really important point. We want to make this functionality as accessible as possible to all EV drivers. So in addition to that, everything is taken care of by the driver's existing network. So I'll just, with this example, all a ChargePoint customer needs to do is, pull up to a station, initiate a charge, and then their car starts charging. So it really, makes it more convenient and provides drivers confidence that they can go, they can travel seamlessly. And I think where this has come to light in the past is for drivers, they might have the apps or the network fobs for networks within their community, but they go across the border, or they go west or east, and all of a sudden they're confronted with a new network, and they have to download another app. The goal with EV driver roaming is to ensure to sidestep that and ensure that the experience is more seamless, and you can use your existing network to start a charge wherever you go. So to provide a bit more context as to what EV driver roaming is and how it works, essentially it's a collaboration between EV charging networks with this joint commitment to provide more seamless access to drivers in terms of their access to charging. As I mentioned, there's nothing EV drivers need to do to charge on another network, as long as their network is part of a roaming partnership. Now, the protocol that, for those of you who are technically inclined, I'll go into a bit of the detail on the protocol that helps us engage in this partnership. And the protocol that allows this collaboration between charging providers, or what we call our peer-to-peer relationship, our handshake, it is called OCPI. It's an open independent protocol supported by a wide range of charging companies across the world. And it is the safest, easiest, and most reliable way of facilitating these partnerships. The protocol allows collaboration, allows the collaboration between networks, and allows us to share really critical information like station location and status, and price to driver. And this, again, is to ensure that the driver can access all this information on their existing account. And using OCPI really helps ensure that roaming can be scaled to all charging networks with really minimal additional effort. So once we've been able to add more and more partners to our roaming community, and this protocol has enabled us to do so. So I just wanted to give a bit of a visual here. I'm really into my dark mode on my ChargePoint app these days, so probably not as easy to see on the screen. But what you see here is on the map view, you see that you can open in your app and see charging stations. In this case, in my neighborhood, you can see charging stations that are ChargePoint and Flow. I can then click on that station, and then I can get the same information I would get with a ChargePoint station. So I can see the price, I can start a charge, and I get information on driver tips. So it is a fairly seamless experience. So, I wanted to address this question. I'm not sure if this is a question that EV drivers may have, but I just wanted to share why we are roaming and why it was important for us to continue to expand our partnerships. And it is really core to our mission as a company to grow the EV market and remove any barriers to consumer adoption. And it really, doubles down on our commitment to focus on the driver experience and make it as seamless as possible. And I think what the growing number of roaming partnerships across North America suggests that this commitment is industry-wide. I think we all have a vested interest in ensuring that this market is as big as possible, but also that it is really putting the driver first. And we are making the fueling experience with electric a lot more convenient and seamless than it is with gasoline or diesel. And, I think for that reason, more and more networks are joining. And, I think this works best when we're all roaming together. So, if they're, our networks are using, encourage them to, join into partnerships, because this is how we make it, this system work the best. So I just wanted to highlight here a couple of key roaming partnerships we have in North America. ChargePoint is roaming with most of the major North American networks. I will point out that our roaming partnership with Flow was one of our first roaming partnership to go live, which was great to have Canada highlighted in that respect. In addition to that, Canada roaming with BC Hydro, Greenlots, as well as EVBox, EVgo, and Electrify America. Now, I think this is one of my last slides, so I'll just run through this. I just wanted to reflect on a couple of key principles that underline our roaming partnerships or our peer-to-peer relationships. And really, I think this is how we and our partners are looking at roaming, and that is that drivers shouldn't have to make any changes to access roaming. So that means that they can use their existing apps, or moving forward, looking at using fobs as well. Drivers should not need to have multiple accounts. Drivers should not have to pay any transaction costs, and drivers should have access to stations across North America and all networks. So really, these are the principles that we support and hope other networks continue to promote. And that is the conclusion of my presentation. I'll just end here, and I'm sorry if I've gone over time, but just to suggest, kind of going back to my initial slide about the projection of EV sales. I talked about policy being an important component. I talked about focus on the EV driver experience, and another critical component is the EV driver and providing education and awareness. And I think that's an important and critical role that you as EV Society members and participants have in this ecosystem. And I think it's a really important one. And bringing that back to roaming, it's the feedback and driver experiences that have helped shaped how we approach roaming. And so your role as ambassadors, but also as providing feedback to industry is really critical. So with that, I will pause in the presentation and just thank everyone for their attention for the last 25-30 minutes. I don't know how long it was.
Well, that's great, Suzanne. Thank you very much. So we'll maybe drop out of your screen share, if you would. Wonderful. So at this point, I'm going to introduce one of our great members, EV Society members, Jason Arno, who's offered to take us through some of the questions that you have received during your talk. I'll just remind some folks that are using the chat function, we're not going to be using those questions, so please move your questions over to the Q&A, or else they will not be addressed, and the conversation is going to be lost that you're having with other people in chat. So I'll just leave that there. And Jason, it's all on you, buddy.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you, Suzanne. We have a few questions lined up. I'll remind you that you can go into the Q&A panel as an attendee and upvote questions you want to see answered. So Suzanne, the first one is, as new networks launch in Canada, example, Electrify Canada and IV, they don't seem to start with roaming capabilities. How is ChargePoint working to advance roaming agreements as new networks emerge?
Yeah, that's a great question. Our goal and our approach is to roam with as many networks as we can. I think as new networks come on, they are getting an understanding of what roaming is. And I think it takes a while to start these conversations and develop these roaming partnerships, but it's definitely our objective to expand roaming with all networks in Canada, and definitely those conversations are something that are on our radar.
Okay, great, thank you. The next one is, when do you anticipate widespread adoption of ISO 15118 plug-in charge? And can you please quickly explain what it is for attendees that don't know what it is? And secondly, does ChargePoint have any compatible stations yet?
Yeah, so I think I might not do a great job at explaining what the protocol is from a technical perspective, but I think what the question is referring to is the ability to plug and charge, essentially to plug your gain access and to a charging station, to just plug in and have the charging station recognize your vehicle. So kind of sidestepping the need for, or not using your app in that particular way. And from our perspective, we support the intent of 15118 and the goals of plug-in charge. Right now at the international standards body making level, they are making some important changes to that protocol, particularly around some elements of security. So for us, we support the intent, and I think that aligns and circles back to our goals of making sure that EV drivers have really seamless and convenient access to charging. And we just want to ensure that when that however this happens with plug-in charge, that we do so in a way where drivers still have access to the same level of convenience and information that they do today. So that includes, having information about your charging as it's ongoing, getting session summary data. We just want to ensure that as we transition to these new innovations, that these really core fundamental driver features are preserved.
Are you in a position to even estimate timelines?
My crystal ball has been real fuzzy today. So.
No problem, I had to ask. The next one is an easy one. Do you have plans to fill in and complete your charging network across Canada? I noticed that the prairies are very light, specifically the Trans-Canada Highway coast to coast.
Yeah, that's a great question, and something I can address by first explaining our business model. So ChargePoint makes and manufactures our charging hardware, and we operate the smart charging network that sits on top of that helps as EV drivers have visibility into charging options, and then helps the station's owners manage that charging asset. In most cases, ChargePoint doesn't own our stations, but we do sell them to a wide range of station owners, like municipalities, convenience and gas retail locations, restaurants, malls. So what our role is in terms of supporting the rollout of infrastructure, and especially in those areas, is really working with our site hosts and helping them find locations and siting. And so when we look at filling in those gaps, I'm going to circle back to policy. I think the programs currently available through NRCan, both their zero emission vehicle infrastructure program and a fast charging grant program right now, are really important mechanisms to help fill in those gaps. And I think we're going to see, over the next two rounds that are live, perhaps more filling in of those gaps in those areas. And I think NRCan has within its scope and jurisdiction, you know, to specify where they'd like charging to be located. So I think it's a great point that we do need to fill in the gaps. And I think with the mechanisms we have in place with NRCan, especially the mandate for the coast-to-coast highway, I think that's one area where they could focus in their next round of funding for fast charging.
Great, thank you. And that segues nicely into the next one. I think you've touched on this a fair bit, but let me know if there's anything else you'd like to say. The question is, what is ChargePoint's strategy to influence municipal, Ontario, and Canadian governments to incentivize sales of EVs?
Yeah, so I work a lot with municipalities, and they're a great level of government to work with. And my primary reason for saying that is because they can impact change in a significant way. While they don't have the same policy levers that provincial or federal government does to implement, you know, GHG regs for vehicles or ZEV mandates, they do control some really critical pieces that relate to EV charging infrastructure. So we work with municipalities on developing EV-ready building codes. BC has been quite successful with that, with over 14 different municipalities that have 100% EV-ready building codes. We are engaging with municipalities in Ontario to see how a similar policy could be implemented within the bylaws and structures of the Ontario municipalities. And I know some municipalities in the prairies have also been looking at that. In addition, we're working with municipalities to look at policies around electrifying car share and ride hailing, looking at what types of licensing or parking permits can be discounted, for example, to incentivize electrification of those particular fleets. And then the last piece in terms of working with municipalities is public charging infrastructure and looking at what role they have in supporting the deployment. So I mentioned the city of Vancouver, but there are, you know, a wide range of municipalities across the country that are, you know, they don't know where to start. And I think where they have been starting with the help of NRCan is deploying an initial network of public fast charging, not public fast charging, but public charging. And that is enabling them to learn a bit more about EV drivers and user behavior. So there's a lot municipalities can do. And I think, you know, the Ontario municipalities are at a different stage than in BC, but there's definitely a lot of engaged municipalities in Ontario.
Okay, great, thank you. The next question is regarding charging from Steve. And Steve, I'm going to see if I can interpret this correctly. The question is there something in the works between OEMs to allow all EVs the ability to charge at any of the facilities, i.e. compatible adapters, etc.? I know that we are pretty much looking at 2 or 3 charging standards at this point. I don't know if we'll ever get down to 1, but I'd love to hear your opinion.
Yeah, I mean, again, for crystal ball, fuzzy, but you know, we support open standards, and we support, you know, I think that question is, or, you know, was even more important when we were looking at medium and heavy duty vehicles when they came out, and there was a lot more than 3 different plug options. So I think having, you know, some consistency and standardization on the plug front is really a fundamental component to both passenger vehicles, but also, you know, as we move and it seems like kind of accelerate the trajectory of medium and heavy duty, I think a standard plug there will be even more important, even more impactful from a business case perspective for fleets, and also from an environmental perspective.
Okay, thank you. Next one is, do you have plans to equip charging stations with credit card or debit card readers? This would make it much easier for drivers.
So in our stations do have the ability to tap to pay with a credit card. You can also call in to the ChargePoint hotline to pay with credit card. You can also pay by Apple and Android and Google Pay. So there's a number of ways that you can pay. In terms of credit card readers, I mean, I think most bank cards and Visa cards in Canada have the tap to pay capabilities. So I think that's where most Canadian consumers are how they're accessing payment these days, especially in an environment where we don't want to touch anything.
Okay, great, thank you. And I don't use ChargePoint chargers that often. Is this something that's enabled kind of across the board, or is it at the host's choice whether it's enabled or not?
The payment options?
Yeah.
Yeah, the stations are all equipped with the ability to do tap to pay.
Okay, great, thank you. Next one is another technical question. When roaming, we need to know charger availability and alternatives, redundancy, etc. Multiple locations or more than one unit at a location. How do you plan on solving or dealing with this challenge?
So the question is about, sorry, could you just?
So I'll paraphrase, yeah. I'd say, when roaming, we need to have charger availability, visibility, and also visibility into multiple chargers at the same location or presumably in the vicinity. Does that functionality already exist, or is that a future roadmap item?
So if we are talking about the ability to see if a station is in use, where it's located, and what the price of that charging station is on multiple networks, that capability is available with roaming. If we're talking about, can we physically, I don't think this is what the question is about, if we can physically see if there's a lineup, that's not a function of roaming, but definitely the ability to see, if there's if your network has a roaming partnership with the networks in your vicinity, you will see them on the charging station app.
Okay. So basically, whether you're using a ChargePoint charger or a roaming partner charger, you can see all of the same information that you would be used to make a charging decision.
Correct. So what you're used to seeing and how you're used to seeing it in your existing app is how you would see it. Be it, let's say it's a ChargePoint, you can see a Flow or a BC Hydro. And on the BC Hydro side, they'll be able to see the ChargePoint and the Flow.
Okay, great, thank you. Tim, time check, how much more time would you like to spend on questions? We have a few more.
I think we can do a few more, another maybe 5 minutes, Jason, would be great.
Okay, great, we'll move on. Curry posted this, and I'm going to reinterpret it because the question is, do you have a list of OCI members? And the only thing I can think that is talking about is Open ChargePoint initiative members. Suzanne, I may be guessing there.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that is referring to, unless they're referring to the OCPI, like the number of networks we're roaming with. Yeah, so we have that listed on our website, the roaming partnerships we have live, but I give a snapshot of those roaming partners in the slides I presented.
Okay, great. And this question is, I see that the ChargePoint Express Plus can support up to 500 kilowatt charging. Do you foresee deployment of this capability in the near future?
Yeah, so those stations will be deployed soon. I think where we'll see some really interesting first applications of those are going to be in a fleet space and perhaps with transit. What's interesting about that particular charging technology is it's modular and scalable. So let's just take, if we're looking at a fleet depot, the power module is separate from, the dispenser. And when we're looking at a fleet facility with limited space, we can put the dispenser and the power module in different spots. And then the power modules can be added over time. So you might start off with a lower power capacity, and then you can scale that up to 500 kilowatts over time. That could be, let's say you're at a location and you only have maybe 1 or 2 buses. You can install the power module and add to that over time, or to respond in the future to vehicles that have passenger vehicles that are higher power. Let's say at a gas station, you'll be able to add power modules over time. So the goal with that modularity is that you kind of have to dig, core, drill, put in cement once, and then you can add power over time as technology evolves and as you're ready to install more power.
Okay, great. Here's another credit card related question. One card or fob that we all have is a debit or credit card. Why cannot this be linked to an account for roaming? And the way I'm interpreting that is, I'm carrying a ChargePoint card. Why can't I carry a credit card and that's my ChargePoint card?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to other networks, but you can put your credit card in as a back-end payment source for the ChargePoint app and a number of roaming networks apps. I totally hear the point. I think there's a variety of ways you can pay, on our stations, but with EV driving, you're opening your app to look at where the station is, how to navigate, and looking at a bunch of other features. So that the driver app really becomes a central feature in your experience. So, there are those who will want to pay with credit card, and, that is an option that is available to do so. What driver roaming is focused on is really providing a seamless experience within that app. So it's more than just payment. It's being able to see the station, see the price, get session details, and even if you did pay with a credit card, you'd still have to look at multiple different maps perhaps to see where the charging stations are and if they were available.
Okay, thank you. And I don't remember if you touched on this one. I know you did talk about demand charges. The question is ChargePoint working with the federal government on per kilowatt hour pricing options?
Yeah, it's definitely something that is, you can't see my list of things to do, but it's on the top of my list of things to do. And it's definitely something we're engaging the federal government on, and working with other manufacturers on it. It's a high priority policy item for us. Ensuring that there's equity in pricing, enabling that kilowatt hour, and then other additional business models that can be empowered by the site host by offering that option to pay is really important. So we are looking at a number of different policy options with government right now. I think with Measurement Canada and the body that oversees the kilowatt hour component of regulation, it might not happen overnight, but it's definitely something that we hope to see some movement on in the coming, in the short term, and looking at what we can achieve in the long term versus short term to protect consumers in terms of providing accurate measurement and pricing of that measurement, but also ensure that drivers have access to that equitable pricing.
Jason, I'll jump in maybe if I could. Just a quick note on the latest, that last point is that to assure that EV Society is deeply engaged in the whole charging legislation as well. So we're behind it and pushing hard for some changes there, because that will benefit everybody for sure. And I think we've probably come to the end of the pavement here. This was just terrific, Suzanne. Thank you very, very much for coming on and sharing your expertise with us. I know it's for my own self, it's pretty gratifying to get a glimpse into what's sort of going on. We go through our EV life with blinders on sometimes, even those of us who are heavily involved and don't realize all the work and effort that's going on sort of just below the surface to make it easy for everybody to drive an electric car. So thank you very much for that. I'd also like to, I have to thank some EVS members here. Jason, of course, for his great Q&A. Anise Sharifi, who does our social media. Laura Bryson. Kenneth, of course, has been busy in the background there with some chat issues and questions. And of course, the wizard behind the screen. He's right now behind a green leaf, but that's Chris Guernsey, who sets all of these things up for us on Zoom. Thank you all for your help today. To the audience, I hope that you'll all return for the next Canada Talks Electric Car webinar on August 4th to hear guest speaker Matt Stevens. He's Vice President of Electric Vehicles at Geotab and former chair of Electric Mobility Canada. So as Canada moves to electrification, our group of EV enthusiasts will play an important role. We hope you found today's webinar informative and that it will help continue the EV conversation and grow awareness in our respective communities. Until next time, stay healthy. Thank you for spending this time with us. And thanks again, Suzanne. This concludes today's webinar.